Welcome back to the Unstuck movement. As always, I'm your host, Rob Z. This platform is all about breakthrough, and I love to jump into these episodes with a powerful question right off the bat so we can get the ball rolling and find that breakthrough for you in your life. Today, we have the powerful John Geraghty with us. And John, the question I want to open up with for you is, what is that one word that has had the most profound impact on your journey?
Well, I thank you for having me on, Robin. I think that the one word that I would say is perspective. And I use that word because I believe that the way we look at the world, right? We do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. We do not experience the world as it is. We experience what we expect the world to be. And so our perspective really is like, what do we believe to be true? And whatever we're looking for, we're going to end up finding. And so in my own life, what I found is that as I was able to shift the way I saw the world and shift my own identity beliefs and what I believe to be about myself and other people, that automatically shifting those beliefs gave me new opportunities that gave me greater access to more of my potential. And by doing that incrementally over time, been able to build a life really from, somewhat ruins, right? I think we all have little challenges, right? And so earlier in my life, I struggled with alcoholism, and changing the way I saw myself really gave me an opportunity to find a solid foundation upon which to build, and then incrementally build a life that's really pretty spectacular for me. So.
That's very fascinating, man. Just the word perspective is everything. And it's amazing how words have such a profound impact on our lives, and the words we speak over ourselves change how we look at the world. And those are the words that we speak, and also the things that we think in our head. So I want to get more into that, right? But I just want to just preface this. This is the Unstuck movement, right? So I created this platform for true testimonies of breakthrough. So if you're stuck somewhere in your life, you can always get unstuck and find those major breakthroughs. So I love these stories of perseverance, of faith, of courage, of power, of strength to find those breakthroughs, because everybody on this show has had those major experiences and have found that path for themselves. This platform is brought to you by the Connected Leaders Academy. Check out connectedleadersacademy.com. Today, the major, powerful John Geraghty is in the house, an optimal performance coach, speaker, and the author of Prism of Perspective. His journey from alcoholism to empowerment drives his mission to help others live their best lives. Something you just said, man, that I love, what we look for, we end up finding, right? And it's so true. So whether we realize we're looking for something or not, we end up finding the thing we consciously or unconsciously are looking for. The younger version of you, the older version of yourself that was this alcoholic and had dealt with these struggles, what were you looking for then at that period in your life?
Great question. And I wrestle with it a lot of times, sometimes I think it's difficult to really pinpoint exactly what your motivations were at any given time. But I began to drink as a 14-year-old. And when I was 14, was moving from middle school into high school. And my parents had gotten divorced a few years earlier, and I had no relationship with my dad. And my mom was a school teacher, and she was raising two kids. And so we weren't poor, but we weren't wealthy, and we lived in a wealthy area. And so as you get into high school, people start to have different things that you don't really notice that much when you're younger. So we started to have some gap between what I was able to do and what other people were able to do economically. Mm-hmm. And then simultaneously, essentially, who knows what happened, but I had really bad cystic acne, right? So I went from being a kid that was, dated all the cute little cheerleader girls on my 8th grade basketball team. And then by the time I got to high school, it was almost, and again, my own personal perspective of it was probably worse even than it was, right? It was like the only thing I could see. And so when I look at like what caused me to drink, I was a very good student. I was a very good, almost like a goody kid. Mm-hmm. And because of that, some other people wanted to, that was like an identity that people would take a shot at me about. And so I think I wanted to hide a lot because I didn't really want to stand out anymore. I wanted to almost disappear. And so I started to be a different person. And so you look at like the perspectives, I recreated an identity that alleviated a little bit of temporary pain, but obviously created a lot of, drag on the quality of my life and pain in a different way over time. And I was really in that cycle for about 15 years.
Hmm.
So when I think about the alcoholism, so I drank from 14 to 29. And I think anytime you look at addiction, right, at one point at the beginning of it, it seems to work, right? Like at the beginning of it, you pick up a drink and all of a sudden you're like, oh, it feels so uncomfortable. Everybody's staring at me. This is horrible. And then all of a sudden you have a drink and it's alleviated and it becomes your answer.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us don't pay attention. And all of a sudden the answer becomes the problem. But when you're unconscious in it, you just continue to follow that same track. The other thing that I think happened for me, and I think happens for many other people, is you begin to create a new identity, right? Your identity belief is you're this party person and you're this whatever you happen to be. And then you build your life around the story you tell yourself about who you are. And so when I was young, my story was I was a really good student, I was an athlete, I was, all these things. And then it was almost like to run away from that, I created a new identity. And then I lived that identity for 15 years. And so all through high school and college, I was, everybody has alcoholism in different, I was like a blackout drunk, right? I was a guy that would go out and I would get blackout drunk. And it kept me from really learning. In high school and college, I didn't perform nearly at the level that I could have. Mm-hmm. It kept me from performing athletically like I could have. So it really was a really big challenge, but I didn't see it because I saw it as my escape from the discomfort, the self-consciousness, whatever it was. And so my solution actually ended up creating a much bigger problem than I had the other side, right? And the truth is, like, when I had the challenges, and a lot of that was story, right? The story of how ugly I was, all those things were probably pieces of the way, whatever I was looking for, right? You say you find what you're looking for. Well, if you're in that situation, for myself, that's, I'd look at myself and that was the only thing I could see. That was the only thing was there. And so I wanted to kind of escape. So I did for 15 years and it really stopped working.
Man, yeah, you said so many important things in there that really I resonate with. I've struggled with addiction for years, right? Addiction for me also. I never really struggled with alcohol addiction, but a bunch of other addictions, whether it was from painkillers to marijuana to just, I guess it would be the other stuff.
Right. Yeah.
outside of alcohol.
Yeah. Addiction is like I said, just your way of running from discomfort, mostly,
For sure. And one of the interesting things that you said in there was addictions are difficult because you find something that works at the time, right? So, this thing, like I'm searching for something to work to, like for me, it was I never felt okay in my own, I never felt like okay just being me, right? Mm-hmm. And that led me to things that made me feel different than I was feeling. And I'm like, this helps me feel a little bit different. I need to do this thing more because I feel a little bit better. It only lasts a little bit, but I feel a little bit better. And then, like you said, too, which is interesting, it starts to change your identity and you start to identify with the drug or the alcohol, or whatever it might be. Alcohol is a drug. They're all together, right? But one of the things for me was weed especially made me feel like I was funnier. And also it like made me different, right? I'm different than everybody else because I'm high. And that was one of the things that I could really pinpoint. I noticed this later on in life. One of the lies that I was telling myself was that I'm not funny unless I'm smoking weed, right? That was something that it was a story I would tell myself, and which isn't true. I'm funny either way. And I'm introspective either way. And I had to like realize this about myself. Like, no, that thing actually is a detriment to my life. It's not a supporting factor to my life. So really good introspective stuff there, man. Really important. And also the thing that you said about wanting to disappear because of attention. I think this is something that gets very, it doesn't get talked about enough with teenagers. A lot of the times teenagers will do negative things and harm themselves because they don't like the attention they're getting. And the attention might be for something good that they do, but they don't like the feeling of that because they don't know how to connect that with who they are. how did you over the years connect what you were good with or the things that were great about you with who you were and learn to like accept those things?
So gradually, but
Yeah.
really what happened. So I first time I ever got sober for any length of time, I was 20, you know. The first time I decided I'd never drink again, I was 14. The first time I drank, I blacked out and got sick. And I was like, I'll never do that again. And literally it was over Christmas break in my freshman year. And 2 days later I was drunk, you know. And so it began to be this thing that I did. And where I lived, there was a lot of space for it because it was what was happening. Like
Mhm.
we would on the weekends, our high school, I lived near the beach and there wasn't a whole lot else going on. We would have 10 keg parties for our high school. Like, I mean, the high school wouldn't sponsor it, but there would be, 10 kegs for a group of everybody's underage, you know?
Good Lord.
And yeah, so, and then I went off to the University of Florida, which is an excellent school. Um, at the time, it was not nearly as competitive as it is today, but I moved up there with all my friends that I've been drinking with. So it was just like a continuation. It wasn't like an opportunity to remake myself. Everybody already knew who I was in that way. And
Mhm.
again, I felt more comfortable at the beginning part. And I never really wanted to get blackout drunk. Well, that's not true. Sometimes I remember really just wanting to disappear and really wanting to get blackout drunk. But as I got older, I just was not good at not getting blackout drunk. Right. So I'd like go, I'd put up all these things. I'm only going to take out X amount of money with me. I'm going to drink water in between. I'm going to do all these things. And it just became so much more of an effort to try not to get drunk that I had a couple of events. One thing, I never got DUI, though I got pulled over 4 times. And I never had an accident, though I had 3 flat tires from hitting the curb. So I was just like incredibly lucky, right? Because I
Wow.
drank and drove. And I had one of those events right before I was 29. Not before I was 29. I was 29. It was also, so the first time I ever got drunk, that was New Year's Eve. The last time I ever got drunk was New Year's. So I was with the girl who's now my wife, and I was visiting her in South Carolina. Not the time I got drunk, but like 6 days earlier, I got drunk, hit the curb, flattened a tire, and I decided, okay, I can't do this anymore. I was like doing a kind of like a moral inventory, but on my own, like thinking it wasn't even a moral inventory. It was a future. It was looking into the future and was thinking about like what's going to happen, because I actually was succeeding in a sales job, right? So I was having success and I was having fun. I had a very social job, so I was having fun, things along those lines. But I was looking at it, going, okay, what's going to get in the way of
Mhm.
me having a successful life? And I was like, oh, I'm sure, like, don't look at the alcohol, you know.
Right.
And then I realized, well, the alcohol's really going to get in the way. And so I remember I was visiting her up in Charleston. We'd really only been dating like 8 months at the time. And she was from South Carolina and I was from Florida. And I went up to visit her on New Year's. And I told her, I was like, look, I'm going to quit drinking. And she didn't like my drinking, because she'd already told me, she was like, look, I have no interest in being with someone long term that drinks like you do, but I was fun. And so I told her, I was like, I've decided I'm going to quit drinking. I've either quit already, or we can go out tonight, because we were double dating with a friend of hers. We can go out tonight and then I'll quit tomorrow. And she just didn't really think I'd be able to quit. And she was like, I don't want you to be a stick in the mud. She didn't say it, but she thought to herself, like, I don't want you to be like this, really dull guy on this double date with us. And then you're going to go home tomorrow and drink with your friends, She's
Yeah.
going to be pissed. So she was like, well, why don't you quit tomorrow? And so we went out drinking, and it's funny because I had purchased a full length leather coat for her for Christmas. That was like a thing back then, and so we went out drinking, and it was cold, and we left her coat, and she gets cold, really cold. So we left her coat at a bar, and we didn't recognize it. So we were both kind of a little lit. And then we're in the hotel, and I remember it's like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm sitting in the hotel, and I'm thinking to myself, I want a soda, right, to go to the vending machine, and I'm like, I can go down there naked. So I walked down the hall. So I walk down the hall of the hotel naked, get my soda. Nobody sees me. But still, the whole thing is like, I remember not being that drunk on that night. Like, that's my story about it. Just because I can remember it. Like, just because I can remember it, that was like, I wasn't that drunk. So, so anyway, I obviously had some challenges around there. I decided at that time I was going to get sober. At the time, right at that time, Anthony Robbins, what was it called? Power?
Yeah. Yeah.
Something about power, personal power.
Personal power.
Personal power. Yep. Right. So that little, that audio tape book was out, and one of my roommates had it. And so I started listening to that, and there was a thing inside there that I still use in my coaching technique all the time. He calls it the Dickens pattern. I call it Scrooge technique just because I think it's more specific, but it's really around what happened for Scrooge. And so if you think about what happened for Scrooge, he was living a life that wasn't really satisfying him, right? He was kind of miserly, unhappy, nobody liked him, etc. But he wasn't aware. He didn't really understand, hadn't thought about the consequences. And then he had an intervention. And so when you have the intervention, it shows him past, present, and future. And then he's able to look at what's going on and make a decision, and yay, it's Christmas Day and I'm going to live differently. And so the way that the Dickens pattern or Scrooge pattern works is you look at the past and think about how has your behavior impacted your life in the past. And so I looked at, my grades and my, lost opportunities and lack of confidence and, all the different things that I'd done to screw up. And then I looked at my present and, a week earlier, I'm crashing a car into the corner of a curb. And, so my life's not really, the girl that I'm with that I really care a lot about has already told me, she's like, I got no interest in being with you if you're going to show up this way. And then I looked into the future, and that's the real powerful one. When you look into the future, right? I think the scariest thing for Scrooge was the idea that, nobody was at his funeral, right? And the people were celebrating his death. And so I looked into the future and I'm like, okay, I haven't had a DUI. I haven't had a car accident, but that's not likely to continue if I keep drinking like I am.
Yeah.
And so I could go to jail. I could kill someone. I could maim myself in a car accident and end up in jail, right? Or I could just build, I did not have very good values while I was drinking, right? I did not have a good connection to living a good life, right? Like at the moment, your decision-making is not very good.
Those two things don't go hand in hand.
They don't go very well. So I would realize like I could build something, even if I built my business or whatever, if I was drunk, I knew I could do something that could totally implode my life. And so I created enough, what you're trying to do is shift your association to alcohol and shift it away from being this thing that you're like, oh, I'm fun, I'm the life of the party, look at me, to no, this alcohol means incarceration. It means negative impact. It means hurting other people. And so when you when you get your association strong enough, the desire to drink kind of goes away. And so that's really what happened for me. And then I got very deep into personal development. So hold on, what am I going to do? I need some help. I didn't go to AA. I just started reading. And just like you, I'm an avid reader. I can tell you're an avid reader by looking behind you. And so for the past 30 years, I've basically read a book a week on something in the ballpark of personal development or health or relationships or something along those lines. And so my perception of myself moved, right? The way I saw myself is moving out of being this party person to being this person of growth and development. And then I've been on that journey for quite a while.
I love it, man. The replacement and you can't have one without the other. If something comes to mind for me, I used to smoke cigarettes and I also loved cycling. And I can recall smoking a cigarette and then riding my bike and being like, I can't do both of these things. This is like riding my bike with the brakes on the whole time. Like, what the hell am I doing to myself? They don't work together, right? So success and addiction don't work together, or they will work together to a certain point where they don't work together any longer. So that's great insight on that. We're going to take a quick break, 60 seconds to shout out the sponsor of the podcast. When we come back, John, I want to talk about courageous authenticity, because we need to talk about being authentic, and especially coming out of an addiction, you can't be authentically you when you're wrapped up in addiction? How do you be courageously authentic? We'll talk about that next.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world, globally, all across the country, high performers, titans of industry. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, this is where you want to be. Join the Connected Leaders Academy today. We are scaling massively. We want to welcome you in. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JASCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
So, John, I love talking about authenticity because it is everything. And this is something that's been very important for me in my life, is to find out how to be authentically me. What does it mean for you? Courageous authenticity. What does that mean to you?
So again, thanks for asking. So I named my business Courageous Authenticity at a time that it was pretty much aspirational, I would say. In other words, at the time that I named my business Courageous Authenticity, I do not really think I was courageously authentic, but I wanted to be. And like you said, words have power. And just the idea of every time I'm typing in my email or telling someone, how to get in touch with me, or talking about my company, Courageous Authenticity, that has been a reminder that that's really how I want to live. And
that's really good.
Today, I would say
that's good. Name your company something that you are aspiring to be. You have to say it all the time and believe it. That's good.
Yeah, like Pat Lencioni in his work around values and core values and things along those lines, and I forget which one of his books it was, might have been Advantage, but he talks about the idea that your core values need to be present and noticeable by other people. And I think that might be true if you're building a big business, but I think as an individual, we have a lot of opportunity to move in the direction that we really desire. And so I'm big into aspirational values. If you aspire to be something, lay it out there, get a good vision of it, make that a value that you think about. What does that look like in my life? What does courageous authenticity look like? And courageous authenticity to me means really leaning into trusting that my perspective matters, that it's valid, not that it's right, not that it's the one everybody else has to embrace, but I don't have to shy away from anything. If I feel something in particular, I can say, here's my perspective. Here's the set of facts that I'm basing it upon. Here's the story I've told myself that has landed me in this direction. This is what I truly believe. What do you believe? I'm open to hearing what you believe. And, together we may evolve our perceptions and land in a somewhat different spot. But I have found for myself that I really do, I would say I very much live, I am me. And in a way, and it's funny, there's a saying that you may be familiar with, it's one of the ones that guides me a lot. It says, when I was 18 years old, I was so worried about what other people thought about me, right? And that was kind of the alcohol thing we were talking about, right? As I approached my 40s, I realized I didn't so much care anymore. Now that I'm in my 60s, I realize no one was thinking about me anyway. And for me, that's just been, so I'm 61. It has been really empowering. And I will tell you that kind of was around the timeline, I may have been a little early on the 60, it might have been, I was in my mid 50s when I realized, like, nobody cares. Nobody's thinking about you. You're not the star of anyone else's show. They're all wondering what you're thinking about them. Right. And so it gives you a lot of freedom to just be yourself. And as I have done that, one of the things that's been remarkable is you don't waste any time thinking about someone else, how someone else is going to interpret what you do.
Right.
I look back in my life and I realized I was like, a lot of my stuff was, how is someone else going to think about this? Or what are they going to, or what's my, and when you realize, like, nobody's really paying attention. to you. They're just not. They're the star of their own show. You're a bit player.
Mm-hmm.
Stop thinking they're really thinking about you. And then it allows you to take all of your focus and think, what do you want to create? What do you want your life to be about? And for me, that, authenticity is really think about, like, going back to the prism that we talked about a little bit. The way I structure my prism is like you have identity beliefs, you have beliefs about others and beliefs about the world. And so your identity beliefs in my mind are your purpose, your vision, your values, and your strengths. Right. And so really understanding, like, what are those things? And then if you do it well, you have your beliefs, your aspirational stuff over here in the belief side. But then the presence is really acting in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're trying to do, in my mind, with your self-awareness, self-control, is get those two things to line up so that you're living the aspirational side of yourself.
Yeah.
And then you're living, courageously authentic, right? To me, that's kind of how I define it.
My number one core value is integrity, right? Because I did not have much integrity when I was younger. And the older I get, the more I understand how essential integrity is to being authentic, right? So if I'm not integrous, then I really can't see integrity in others clearly. So we can only see something as clearly as we are that thing. And as off on that thing as we are, then we see everything else as off, right? Like it's like if you're inauthentic, then you really can't see authenticity. You see authenticity as somebody being fake or somebody bragging, right? But when you are authentic,
you assume
when you have it, then you know it. Once you know it, then you can see it clearly. And you were saying there, man, it's really, really one of my, like, if I had a genie came to me and what's a wish? One of the wishes would be, I don't ever want to care what anybody ever thinks about me ever again. I don't ever want to have a thought about what does somebody think about this. That would be, what a beautiful gift that would be, right? That's one of my prayers too, is like this fear of man that we have. Like, what does man think about us? Like, it's such a useless thought, but it's like built into us. So working that one out is huge. And I hear that from my anybody who gets older. My dad says this. I was hearing you say this. By the way, you look great for 61. And as I get more gray, you can't see much. There's a lot of gray in here. As
a little bit going on here.
I hope I get the gray hair that you have, man. It looks good. You're working into that
60
as well.
It's my courageous authenticity again. Like, I'm just like, part of me, I do a lot of business consulting and things along those lines. And so part of you is like, no, I'm going to look like this, if I'm going to look like whatever, like, this is what I think of myself.
Yeah.
This is what my authentic self, this is what my authentic, not somebody else's should look this way. This is like, I feel most authentic when I have shorter hair or whatever. It just doesn't feel like I'm really me, if that makes sense. It's like, really, it's your hair. What's the difference? But it's a way of showing up in the world and being who you are.
Being who you are. I was going through, when I prepped for these episodes, I asked for your favorite quotes, and you left an amazing quote from Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. What a quote. And that's so good, man, because just the line there, our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. How did that quote impact your life?
Well, thank you. I love Marianne Williamson. I think she's, when I first got sober, her book, that comes from her book, Return to Love, which was actually one of Oprah's first books. I think it might have been her first book in her book club. And so, what I saw is that part of, even like when I talked about drinking, right? So I was these things. I was academically pretty talented. I was a good athlete. I did all these things, and I hid from it. Right. So it was like whatever was strong, I was like trying to hide from. I was moving away from it because I was uncomfortable being in the light. Mm-hmm. That quote later goes on to say that we are all meant to shine as children do, And it says something along the lines is when we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the things that I believe is really just modeling being you, because you are perfect. If we can you go back to the quote from Michelangelo, where he was asked, how did you carve David into the marble? And he's like, I didn't carve David into the marble. David was in the marble. I carved off everything that wasn't David. And so in our own lives, sometimes we think, what do I need to add to be adequate? Right. But it's really like, what do I need to remove to allow my light to shine, to allow my truth to really show up? And, so again, authenticity is letting go of the facade.
Yeah.
Letting go of trying to behave in a particular way. So sometimes when I say exactly kind of similar to what you said, I want to get to the point where I don't really care what other people think. And I've kind of gotten very much way down that. I'm not saying it never happens, right? But it's not something that I lose a lot of sleep over. And people are like, well, you have to care what other people think. And I'm like, no, you don't. If you take the time to think about your purpose and your values,
mm-hmm.
and you lean into your purpose and values, and you've chosen them, right? Like I've chosen the values that I live by. And if somebody else doesn't really appreciate who I am or how I'm showing up in the world or whatever, that's okay. They can have a different set of values.
Mm-hmm.
But the guiding light for me is my values, right? Like those are the things that I'm worried about rather than someone else's interpretation of how I'm showing up in the world. My North Star is my understanding of what I believe in, how I want to show up in the world, what energies, one of the ways I think about my spirituality is kind of the idea, like if you were a god, what are the energies, what are the traits that you would want to emanate into the world, right? What should God be? Love and compassion and forgiveness and generosity and non-judgment. And so, I think about like, if I'm living those values and I'm living them in the world, then at some level, I'm a creator, an expander of those energies in the world. And if somebody misinterprets, or like you said, somebody might think I'm really phony, I'm not, but they can interpret it that way and they can make up the story and they can tell their friends and they can do whatever they do, but it doesn't make it true. It doesn't, like, just because somebody says, oh, you're a phony, you're full of whatever, like, you're entitled to believe whatever you believe.
That's really good, man.
Based on my values.
It's so true, because that's where the integrity comes from. If I'm living from my values, then I'm going to be very integrous. And so nobody can penetrate me. Nobody can change how I look at myself, because I know who I am, because I live by these things. That's so important. And it takes a journey and a lifetime sometimes to get there. So as we come towards the end of this episode, I really did want to ask you, though, your most recent book, The Prism of Perspective. I just love the title of that. What does the prism of perspective mean?
Okay, so the way I look at the prism of perspective is I said perspective was my first thing, right? The thing that we shape our world based on our beliefs, our energy, and our presence. And so from a metaphorical perspective, I look at the prism of perspective as how we experience life. And just like white light comes into a prism containing all the colors of the rainbow, our lives come at us containing all of the different opportunities, right? We can create incredibly different lives, varied lives based on the circumstances that are coming at us, right? The circumstance does not determine our life. We're determining our lives based on what we believe to be true about ourselves, right? Our identity beliefs, what we believe to be true about others. Because if I judge you or I see you in a particular way, I'm going to miss out on the opportunity to really see your greatness, right? If I'm judging you, I'm going to create an identity about you rather than really see you. I'm going to see that thing I made up about you. And then about what do we believe to be true about the world? Is it dangerous? Is it safe? Is it abundant? Is it scarce? Right? Are we growing or are we stagnant? Or is it stuck? right? And so the Prism of Perspective says our beliefs filter the information. And basically there's about 2 billion bits of information, they say, that you can process at any given time. And our senses, or actually that are available, but our senses will only process about 120 bits at a time. So you got 2 billion bits and we're processing 120. So we're just seeing a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's the raw material that's coming into your life. Now you're going to build your life on it based on how you engage. And so the bottom part of the prism is really about how do you generate energy, right? Like what are your foundational things? Exercise, sleep, nutrition. What do you do to have positive psychology? What are your positive psychology practices? Because just like going to the gym, right? We all know, oh, you want to be fit, you better go to the gym, or you better work out somehow or another, right? Positive psychology is really about the idea, if you really want to have a great positive psychology, you probably want to do some kind of meditation or prayer or breath work or mindfulness or gratitude or forgiveness or compassion work. You know, what are the things that are going to shift your brain so that it continues to work your filter so great stuff comes through? And then the last piece is, how do you generate flow? How do you get into a state of consciousness where you're performing at a very high level? And then the last piece is, how do you fine tune it? In the space between stimulus response, like Viktor Frankl says, we create our life, right? And so we have this interpretation of the world, we energize it, and then we have to think, what's the story that I'm telling myself about this, so that I can create a life of being, in my mind, like the high levels of energy, or I'm a co-creator of the universe with our creator, right? Or I'm partnering with different people to build something fantastic. Low levels are I'm a victim or I'm a fighter. And so we're using this energy, and then we're shifting our lives so that we can live vibrationally, energetically at a high level, that we're attracting great stuff in, and that we're emitting great stuff out in the world, so that we are, you know, like you said, lead, impact, and transform, so that we're able to lead, impact, and transform people by our essence and by who we are and how we're showing up. And what I think puts us in a good position to do that is really thinking about those different elements of the prism and playing with them, thinking about them as like buttons that we can push, or, you know, dials we can twist, or levers we can play with, so that we can resonate up to our highest and best potential. So that's, to me, the Prism of Perspective. And the book itself is actually, it's a self-development novel, and it's a story about a young financial advisor who was also, I was a financial advisor. It's a young financial advisor who was an alcoholic, and he had gotten sober, and it took him 70 years to kind of get his life in order. But then he's just 90 days into his career, and he's beginning to not hit his numbers, and it looks like he's going to fail out. So they do an intervention, kind of the Scrooge thing we were talking about, except instead of past, present, and future, they have someone teach him about how his beliefs are impacting him, how his practices around energy and his practices around presence are keeping him from being able to really be open to the potential of the clients, of the people he's meeting. And so it shifts his perspective, and then he becomes more creative. And yay.
I love the fact that you wrote your life story and a personal development book in the context of a novel and a story. That's how we learn. We learn through stories. And you read so many personal development books, and it's a lot of information, but there's not a story arc in some of them. And that's just a great way to go about that. And we retain information so well that way. So I'm excited about that, man. I think it's really cool what you're doing, and I just love the energy, love the message. I'm really glad we got to connect. Make sure.
As am I.
Thank you. And anybody who's watching or listening, check out courageousauthenticity.com. John, anything you want to leave the audience with before we take off?
No, just appreciation for you. You know, I really appreciate your desire to continue to impact the world in a positive way, and to have created this platform where people get a chance to share their, you know, joy and hope for the world. And so it was a real pleasure to be connected, and thank you, and best wishes to you and all that you do.
Thank you, sir. Same to you. Thank you so much for being a part of the Unstuck movement.